Hello, everyone. My name is David Drever. I'm a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional, or MVP, in the security and Microsoft 365 spaces. This is my first video in a new series all about data loss prevention. In the series, I intend to go over the basics of data loss prevention and then slowly introduce more and more complex real-world situations that we need DLP to help assist with. If you're here, you've likely been to my website, but if not, please check out daviddrever.com. I've thrown the link into the video description as well. This is a website I've had for over a decade. It's changed formats and even domains over the years, but its purpose still is and always will be to provide some helpful processes and tips and the different tools that I use every day that I can help you with. If you've never been there before, please check it out. Hopefully there's something there that you can use. In today's video, we're going to focus on the purpose of a DLP policy. What is it intended for? But even more importantly, how are organizations using them? I'll then dig into a demo of creating a DLP policy. And in my next video, we'll then show you what that end result of the policy that we create today looks like. So basically, in other words, what does an end user and the administrator see after the policy is in place? Just a quick disclaimer before I get going. The screens and outcomes you see today are subject to change. Microsoft is constantly updating and upgrading the capabilities of Microsoft Purview, and as a result, what you see in my video may change or may be different when you go try it yourself. I feel, however, the fundamentals I'm going to cover today will be more than sufficient to carry you through. In fact, I have even older videos out there today that are still quite helpful, so go check them out. So having said all that, let's dig into data loss prevention feature of Microsoft Purview. So before we dig into the policy itself, let's first have a quick discussion on what data loss prevention is. The intent of a DLP policy is to help control the flow of data, but not just any data. Its focus really is on the data you consider sensitive in your organization. This can be anything from financial information to employee personally identifiable information, also known as PII, to internal budgets or strategy documents. But while the focus may be on sensitive data, it isn't limited to that, but that's just what most organizations focus on. If you look at this visually, let's say I have files in a SharePoint site in my Microsoft 365 tenant. And whether intentional or malicious, sensitive information is being shared with unauthorized users. And these unauthorized users can be internal or external or even both. DLP's intent is to stop or at least control the flow of this data to those unauthorized users. Now, one last thing before moving on to the policy. Let's first talk high level about the components of a DLP policy. The policy itself is a container for the controls you wish to enact. The policy controls the type of data you want to protect, whether that be content connected to Microsoft 365 resources or cloud applications via browsers or network monitoring. It also manages the template for which you will be used to monitor data flow, whether that be information categorized as financial or medical, private, or something completely custom. Finally, it also controls the policies that are deployed to different locations in your organization. A policy also contains the rule. This is part of the policy that actually does something. A rule, in turn, has three main parts. The first is the condition. Basically, this is what the policy is looking for, such as content shared externally or restricted content shared internally. The second part is the action. What do you want the policy to do once it's triggered by the condition? Do you want to audit or block or just, let users know they shouldn't be doing it? The final component is the notification and reporting. Here, the administrator can control the notifications to the end user, what they will receive, or even what alerts an administrator is going to get. So now that we've covered the basics, let's dig into an actual policy. For this first exploration into data loss prevention or DLP policies, we're going to assume your organization has its own Microsoft Purview information protection labels, also known as the sensitivity label, deployed to your environment. For this example, your tenant is configured with 4 labels ranging from least sensitive to most. These labels are public, internal, confidential, and restricted. Our goal is to block any sharing of confidential information from leaving the organization. However, we do want our users to be able to override because there may be true business cases where this is necessary. As you can see, we are sitting at the Microsoft Purview landing page. To access the DLP console, you click on Solutions, which is on the left-hand panel, and select Data Loss Prevention. Now, you may already have it listed in the Quick Launch area of the selection control bar, but for now, let's assume you've never been there or you haven't been there recently. Next, we're going to click on Policies. You'll notice I have a number of policies in place already. However, if you look at the mode, they're all disabled to allow us to focus on the policy we're creating today and the outcomes of it. To get started, we're going to click on the plus Create Policy button. We are now provided with options for the types of data we want to protect. The option on the right, Inline Web Traffic, focuses on cloud apps and AI tools such as ChatGPT and network-based protections. We'll cover that another day. For now, we're going to focus on data connected to our Microsoft 365 sources by selecting Enterprise Applications and Devices. Here's where you can see we select the template we wish to base our policy on. We have Financial, which you can see focuses on various financial bits of data for different countries. Next is Medical and Health, which focuses on things like health card numbers and diseases. Then we have Privacy, which focuses on various forms of personal identifiable information, or PII, such as driver's licenses and passports. Now notice that while I have one of these templates selected, I can change the country or region, and it will allow me to focus only on items for that country. Enhanced is only for certain countries and provides more in-depth options. For example, the US Patriot Act. Finally, most policies are created using the custom template. This allows us to start with a blank slate effectively. So we're going to select that one here and continue on. Next, we'll give the policy a meaningful name. For DLP policies, I prefer to use a naming convention along the line of target location dash target content. Another convention I'd like to use, especially creating both internal and external sharing policies, is to indicate if it is internal or external, as you may have different processes depending on the internal versus external approach. I don't advise adding things like the action to be taken because that can change over time and you can't currently rename a DLP policy. So for this one, I'm going to name it SPO for SharePoint Online _ OD for OneDrive - external - confidential content shared externally. The description is completely optional. Update based on your own internal processes, but for now, we'll just click Next. I'll discuss admin units another day. Leaving this as it is will be fine. Just click Next. Notice that Purview automatically selects all of the available locations at once. If you notice, by clicking on Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot Chat, all of the other options are removed. And this is because you can't have Copilot along with the other options. It's very focused when it comes to Copilot. I also want to show you something very quickly. I'm going to select Exchange and SharePoint sites. We'll click Next. We're going to click Next again, and we're going to create the rule. I'll come back to this, and I'll come back and do this in more detail in a second, but I wanted to show you something quickly. I want to show you how scoped locations are very important to the rules within a policy. If I click on Add a Condition, look at the options I have available to me. You'll notice that I have about 9 items available as conditions. Now let's cancel and head back to the locations options. This time, I'm only going to select Exchange. Now let's go back to the rule. And now let's add the condition again. Look at all the options available to us now. The reason you're only seeing a few options in the previous example is because when a policy is scoped to multiple locations, the policy rules are limited to the options common between the 2 locations. In the case of SharePoint and Exchange, only those 9 options before are common between the 2. and that's why the list is so limited. This is another reason why I do not group scoped locations into policy, with the exception of SharePoint and OneDrive. Now let's go back and build this policy around SharePoint and OneDrive. Now I can limit the sites I want to point this policy at by clicking on the Edit in the Actions column, but I'm not going to do that for this policy. As for now, I'm just going to click Next until we get to the rule again. Now that I'm creating my rule, let's give it a meaningful name. This is important because the rule name will show up in the reports that you want to know which rules are involved if you're having troubles or monitoring activities. So we'll call this Demo Confidential Content Shared Externally. We can again place a description if we wish, but it is optional. Click on Add Condition. We're going to select Content is Shared from Microsoft 365 and then select the option with people outside my organization. This will allow us to capture content that is shared externally only. Unfortunately, you can't monitor for both internal and external sharing in the same rule. Because we also want this to fire for externally shared confidential content, we want to add another condition. So click on Add Condition again. This time, select Content Contains. Notice that the wizard adds the AND between conditions. You can click on that and change it to OR if that is necessary for your policy. You don't have to add a name to the Content Contains group box, but it may be helpful for others if they're reviewing your policy. So I'll type the group name sensitivity label as confidential. Next, click on Add and select Sensitivity Labels. The available sensitivity labels in the tenant will open in the blade. Select Confidential or whichever one suits your needs, and then click Add. So now that we have our conditions set up, we'll tell the policy what we want it to do. Click on Add an Action. You can select the option for running a Power Automate flow, but I'll cover that another day. In this case, we want to restrict access to, so select that option. Notice the options available to us. I only want to block external users even if both internal and external are provided when sharing. So I'm going to select that option. Now I can decide how I'm going to let my users know when they perform the action I don't want them to do. So I'm going to enable user notifications. We also need this if we want to allow the users to override the DLP block. Our only option is to notify users in Office 365 service with a policy tip or email notification. I don't know why this isn't turned on automatically, maybe because Microsoft is planning on providing more options in the future. I need to click in that text box in order to allow user overrides. Notice when I toggle it on, the option for overrides becomes available and disables if I remove that option. We can customize who the messages are sent to, but I'm going to leave it with the default option. I also have a number of options available to me if I edit the email, so let's do that now. I don't want a generic display name for my users, so I'll put in both a custom display name and a custom email subject. I can also provide the user some additional options such as remove file sharing, delete the file, override, apply a sensitivity or retention label, report a false positive, or indicate they are unable to take action. Unable to take action is used when the user doesn't have access to the document and can't review it. One thing to note, if you give them the override button, you must also provide the option to override back on the rule screen. In this case, I want a custom email so that I can explain to my users in more detail what the problem is with their actions. So let's enable that option and provide more context. Click Save. Next, we want to provide a similar message as a pop-up policy tip. Now, because we want to allow users to override, we need to ensure we place a check mark in the override box. We also want them to justify this. Remember, all justifications are added to the audit log so they can be reviewed. You can now customize the alerts that are generated and incident reports if you wish to have those provided to analysts or admins. But ensure you do not turn off the send alert to admins, or else no alerts will be added to the Purview console for tracking. We can leave the rest of the options as default and click Save. Notice the policy now gives us a summary of what is happening in the rule. Click Next to continue. The final step is to determine if we want to run the policy in simulation. Turn it on or leave it disabled for now. Usually when I run it in simulation, I'm doing it to ensure things are working just right. So I don't want policy tips to be enabled for my users, but that is an option you can select. For this policy, I'm going to turn it on immediately. And then we can move on. Here we have the final page in the wizard. It's just a summary of the policy. You can review and then click Submit. Now that this has been submitted, we'll give it time to percolate through the environment, and I'll show you what the end user experience will be. In my next video, I'll demonstrate the outcomes of the policy we just created. I'll show you what the end user will see when sharing confidential information. I'll also demonstrate what the administrators will see and how they can view the alerts that occur when a DLP policy fires. Thanks for listening.